The polio vaccination campaign in Gaza is now into its second day. The health ministry says more than 70,000 children were vaccinated yesterday. The goal is to immunize 640,000 kids under 10 in a campaign lasting until next Monday. Israel and Hamas have agreed to limited pauses in fighting to allow the vaccinations. Gaza reported its first case of polio in 25 years last week in a 10-month-old boy who's now partially paralyzed. For more on this, we're joined by Dr. Christopher Labos. He's an epidemiologist and cardiologist joining us this morning from Montreal. Great to talk to you as always.
Oh, thank you for having me.
The campaign is underway. As we understand it, there's one more week to get this done. How important is it to ramp this up to a scale where they can vaccinate 640,000 children? And how urgent is that effort?
Oh, it's critical. I mean, here's the thing. There does not have to be polio anywhere in this world. We used to have polio in Canada. We don't have polio in Canada anymore, apart from a few isolated cases usually related to travel. But you can get rid of polio. But to get rid of polio, you need to have everyone vaccinated. And so if you let vaccination rates slip, which is what has happened in Gaza because of the conflict, you will see more polio cases, you will see more children getting sick, and you will see children becoming paralyzed and living with that paralysis for the rest of their lives. So there is a very real need to do this just because the human cost of polio cases is incredibly high because it is something that leaves you with a disability for the rest of your life.
And how effective is the vaccine itself when, there's so much struggle now trying to get this out to the population in very challenging circumstances? What percentage of the population do they need to reach in order for this to be considered a success?
Well, ideally 100%. In reality, sort of you can get into the high 90s. That's what we aim for. I mean, here's the thing. The more people you have vaccinated, the less polio there is going to be. And even if you have certain people who can't get vaccinated for either logistical or medical reasons, if the rest of the population is vaccinated, they protect the unvaccinated. That is what herd immunity means, that term that was sort of bandied about a lot during the pandemic. So it is critically important that the vaccine get rolled out there. And we know vaccination campaigns work. We proved it. We proved it in Canada. We proved it in the US. We proved it in most countries of Western Europe. And we've proved it in most countries around the world. It's just a question of now, can we do it globally? Can we continue the vaccination effort globally to get rid of polio in its entirety? Because we eliminated smallpox through a mass vaccination effort. We could, in theory, eliminate polio as well. It's just going to require us to get the vaccine to all corners of the planet where it's needed, and especially in cases where polio cases are surging because of logistical and a lack of medical care.
Yeah, and when we talk about those logistics, and we mentioned, the challenging living conditions, the population density in certain areas, can you just take us through the progression of polio? How is it transmitted? What are the symptoms? And again, we know about the paralysis, but how does it get to that point?
So polio is a virus. It is spread from person to person. It's spread via the fecal-oral route. So usually you have to consume it. You don't breathe it in the same way that you do sort of COVID or influenza. So it really is consumed. It goes into your gastrointestinal tract and it infects your entire system. And for the vast majority of people, they have no symptoms or minimal symptoms. 4 to 5% are going to have severe symptoms of fever and gastrointestinal upset. And then that 1% of the population is going to be left with paralysis because it infects the brain and the spinal cord and it damages the nerve cells that feed into your muscles. So if you're that unlucky 1% where the virus damages those nerves, you're going to be left with paralysis that unfortunately is never going to recover.
We know about 90% of all Gazans have been displaced. Children's immunizations have been disrupted. And we've heard other medical professionals raising concerns that if this isn't rolled out quickly enough, that this could mutate as well. There's also the challenge of getting a second vaccine dose into all of these children after 4 weeks. So what happens if this doesn't go as planned?
Well, if this doesn't go as planned, we see more polio cases. We can have resurgences of polio, and we have seen mini outbreaks in Canada and the U.S. We could see this on a much larger scale in Gaza. The reality is that you do need boosters of polio. I mean, the standard immunization schedule is 4 doses, sort of 3 in infancy and a booster shot later on. You get some degree of protection with 2, I suppose. I mean, but that is the challenge. I mean, vaccination is not just one and done. You do require boosters. You have to roll it out to the entire population. And if you don't, you start to have more cases. And as you start to have more cases, it spreads. And the unfortunate reality is that because, with the use of the oral polio vaccine rather than the injectable vaccine that we use in Canada, there's always the small chance that that oral vaccine, which is a live virus, can reawaken and then cause infections in other people. And there's a whole issue about using the oral dose. It's obviously incredibly effective and it's much easier to use from the logistical sense, but you ultimately do want to transition to the injectable dose when you're trying to completely eliminate polio from a specific area.
Well, it's a very challenging effort ahead for the folks out there trying to do this work. We really appreciate you breaking this down for us. That's Dr. Christopher Labos joining us, as usual, from Montreal.